Poor Waitress calls Mafia boss to return his missing wallet, unaware he was testing her. The wallet had enough cash to pay off every debt she had, but Grace called the number inside anyway, and that's when Edward Stone's voice came through the line like a death sentence wrapped in silk. "Do not move. My driver will come for you. Say nothing." She thought she was doing the right thing, but the $10,000 they left her with a note saying, "You passed," made her realize something terrifying. This was never about a lost wallet. So what test did she just pass, and why is a mafia boss now watching her every move? If you're drawn to stories where love and power collide, where doing the right thing can cost you everything, then don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. And trust me, you'll want to see how far Grace's choices take her next. Now, let's continue. It was 2:07 a.m., and the diner was dying down to its familiar graveyard shift quiet. Grace was wiping down the counter, her mind already rehearsing the conversation she'd need to have with her landlord in the morning, negotiating another extension she probably wouldn't get. Her feet ached, a dull, persistent throb against the cracked linoleum floor that smelled of decades of spilled coffee and forgotten dreams. She glanced toward the last occupied booth, booth number 4, tucked in the corner near the window, watching the man who had been her final customer of the night. He was a study in controlled menace, dressed in a black shirt left deliberately open to reveal an intricate tapestry of tattoos crawling across his chest and neck, religious iconography mixed with something darker. He wore his danger like tailored clothing. His features were sharp, almost predatory. Dark hair cropped close, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to dissect everything they touched. A heavy gold chain with a cross pendant rested against his sternum, catching the diner's fluorescent lights with each breath. His presence had transformed the usually comfortable chaos of Harper's into something tense and watchful. He had only ordered black coffee, no cream, no sugar, nursed it for 40 minutes without tasting it, paid with a crisp $100 bill that looked obscene against the diner's worn formica, and left without acknowledging her existence. His movements were precise, deliberate, the kind that suggested violence held carefully in check. He was the kind of man who didn't just leave. He withdrew, leaving behind a vacuum of unspoken threat. As Grace began clearing the table, wiping away the ring of condensation from the cheap ceramic mug, her hand swept across the cracked red vinyl booth. Her fingers brushed against something solid and foreign, wedged deep between the seat cushion and the wall. It was a wallet. Not the worn, practical kind she was used to seeing, but something else entirely. Black leather, Italian by the feel of it, with that particular weight and suppleness that spoke of serious money. It felt wrong in her hand, too valuable, too deliberate. As she pulled it into the light, her stomach dropped. The quality was unmistakable. Hand-stitched edges, brass hardware that hadn't tarnished, the kind of object designed to last and improve with age, a stark, almost mocking contrast to the peeling booth it had been left in. A wave of profound dread washed over her, cold and certain. The weight of the wallet felt disproportionate to its size, as if it carried something far heavier than leather and cash. This wasn't just a lost item. She knew it in her bones. And when she opened it, against every instinct screaming at her not to, the ID inside confirmed her worst fear. Edward Stone, the name that people in her neighborhood only whispered, never spoke aloud. The man whose empire lived in the shadows between legitimate and lethal. And Grace, exhausted waitress with $47 in her bank account and rent due in 3 days, held his entire world in her trembling hands. To understand why Grace made the call that would change everything, you need to understand who she was before that night, before Edward Stone's wallet, before the test she didn't know she was taking, before she learned that sometimes doing the right thing is the most dangerous choice of all. Grace had been raised on a particular brand of morality, the kind that didn't bend when it was convenient, the kind her grandmother had beaten into her consciousness with Bible verses and consequences. Do unto others. God is watching. Your character is what you do when nobody sees. Those principles had been her armor against a world that rewarded shortcuts and punished integrity. She had watched neighbors steal, lie, and climb while she stayed honest and stayed poor. But she'd never wavered. Honesty was the only inheritance she had that couldn't be repossessed. So when she stood in that empty diner at 2:07 a.m., Edward Stone's wallet heavy in her hands, there was really only one choice she could make, even if every desperate cell in her body screamed otherwise. The business card inside was matte black with silver lettering. No company name, no title, just a phone number embossed so precisely it felt like a threat. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone. The screen cracked from a drop she couldn't afford to repair. She dialed before she could reconsider. 1 ring, 2 rings, then a click, sharp and immediate, like a door closing. Speak. The single word landed like a physical force. Not a question, not a greeting. A command that allowed no preamble, no pleasantries, no room for anything except compliance. Grace's throat went dry. I found a wallet at Harper's Diner. The name inside is Edward Stone. I'm calling to return it. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that pressed against her eardrums and made her aware of her own heartbeat. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, colder, the auditory equivalent of a blade being drawn. Your name. Grace. Grace Smith. Where do you work, Grace Smith? Harper's Diner, on 5th and Morrison. Did you open it? The question was a trap. She could feel it. He already knew the answer. He was testing whether she'd lie. But the truth felt dangerous, an admission of curiosity that might imply intent. No, she lied, the word bitter on her tongue. Another pause. Longer this time. Evaluating. Do not move. Do not let anyone touch it. My driver will come for it. You will hand it to him and say nothing. Do you understand? Yes, but I don't need any. The line went dead. Grace stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the silence where his voice had been. The diner suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer, the fluorescent lights harsher. She looked down at the wallet in her other hand and had the irrational urge to throw it away, to pretend she'd never found it, never made that call. But it was too late for that now. She glanced at the clock. 2:11 a.m. How long would she have to wait? Minutes? Hours? The diner was supposed to close at 2:30. She moved to the door and flipped the sign to closed, then killed half the lights. The street outside transformed into something ghostly, sodium street lamps casting pools of sickly yellow across empty pavement, shadows deeper and more defined in the selective darkness. Grace sat in a booth facing the window, the wallet on the table between her and the glass like evidence at a crime scene. She couldn't stop looking at the street. Every car that passed made her flinch. Every movement in her peripheral vision sent adrenaline spiking through her system. At exactly 2:30 a.m., a black SUV glided to a stop in front of Harper's Diner. No squealing tires, no engine rev, just smooth, predatory silence. Grace's breath caught. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged. Massive, easily 6'4", shoulders that seemed designed to break through walls rather than doors. He wore a black leather coat despite the mild night, and moved with the economical precision of someone trained in violence. His face was hard, expressionless, a sculpture carved from muscle and scar tissue. As he crossed the pavement toward the diner entrance, his eyes found her through the glass. She felt pinned, evaluated, catalogued. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful, obscene sound as he entered. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge her as a person, just walked directly to her booth, his gaze dropping to the wallet on the table, then back to her face. Grace slid the wallet across the formica toward him, her hand trembling despite her efforts to control it. He picked it up, checked the contents with swift, professional efficiency, flipping through cards and cash with thick fingers that could probably crush her windpipe without effort. Satisfied, he tucked it inside his coat. Then, from the same pocket, he withdrew a white envelope and placed it precisely where the wallet had been. Their eyes met for a single loaded second. His expression revealed nothing. No gratitude, no menace, no humanity at all. Just assessment, as cold and thorough as a coroner examining a body. Then he turned and left. The SUV's door closed with a solid, expensive thunk. The vehicle pulled away, swallowed by the night as completely as it had emerged from it. Grace stared at the envelope. Her name was written on the front in elegant script, Grace Smith. Hands shaking, she tore it open. Inside, a thick stack of $100 bills, still crisp, still smelling like ink and new paper. She counted mechanically, her mind struggling to process the numbers. $10,000. $10,000. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. And beneath the cash, a small card. Heavy stock. 3 words in the same precise handwriting. You passed. Grace felt the world tilt beneath her. Passed what? She hadn't taken a test. She'd just done the right thing. Returned lost property. Made a phone call. You passed. The money felt radioactive in her hands, dangerous, contaminated by implications she couldn't begin to understand. This wasn't a reward. Rewards felt good. This felt like being marked, like being seen by something that shouldn't have noticed her, like standing in the crosshairs of attention she'd never asked for and couldn't escape. She looked out at the empty street, suddenly certain she was being watched, that somewhere in the darkness, eyes were on her. Cameras. People. Him. Grace shoved the money back into the envelope and stuffed it deep into her purse, heart hammering. She needed to go home. Needed to lock her door. Needed to pretend this night had never happened. But as she grabbed her coat and keys, rushing toward the exit with the envelope burning against her hip, one thought crystallized with terrible clarity. Edward Stone knew her name, knew where she worked, had sent a man to evaluate her, to test her, to deliver this poisoned gift. She had been truly seen, truly known, by a man who shouldn't even be aware she existed. And Grace understood, with a cold certainty that settled into her bones, that invisibility had been her only protection. She had just lost it forever. The paranoia started small. The first night, Grace triple-checked her apartment locks, the deadbolt, the chain, the flimsy doorknob lock that wouldn't stop a determined child, let alone whoever Edward Stone might send. She shoved the envelope with $10,000 inside a cereal box in the back of her cupboard, as if hiding it from herself would make it less real. Sleep came in fractured intervals, punctuated by every creak of the building, every siren in the distance, every footstep in the hallway that might be meant for her door. By the third day, the paranoia had grown teeth. She noticed things. Small things. Wrong things. A black sedan parked across from her building that hadn't been there before, always in the same spot, windows too dark to see through, shadows that lingered too long near the bodega on her corner, figures that seemed to turn away just as she looked. The feeling of eyes on her back when she walked home from her shift, that primitive instinct that screamed predator even when she saw nothing. Grace told herself she was imagining it, exhaustion and guilt manifesting as conspiracy, but the feeling never left. It followed her to work, sat in the booth beside her during slow hours, walked 3 steps behind her on every street. She'd taken the envelope out a dozen times, counted the money, felt the weight of it. Blood money. Test money. Money that came with strings she couldn't see but could feel tightening around her throat. She should return it. She needed to return it. But Edward Stone hadn't left a number to call back. No address. No way to reach him except to wait for him to reach her. And that was the most terrifying part. She couldn't escape, couldn't refuse, couldn't even surrender because he'd designed it so she had no move to make at all. She was a piece on a board, and he controlled every square. On the 7th morning, Grace woke to the sound of an engine idling outside her window. Not unusual in the city. Cars idled all the time. Delivery trucks, ride shares, people warming up their engines. But this sound was different. Heavier, more expensive. The kind of purr that came from engineering meant to intimidate. She pulled back her threadbare curtain. A black car sat directly in front of her building. Not the same sedan she'd seen all week. This one was sleeker, newer, pristine in a neighborhood where pristine didn't exist. As she watched, the driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Not the massive enforcer from the diner, but someone different. Tall, lean, wearing a dark suit that looked painted on. He moved with choreographed precision, reaching into his jacket and withdrawing something small and silver. A phone. He looked up. Directly at her window. Directly at her. Then he held up the phone, tilted his head in a gesture that was somehow both polite and threatening. And Grace watched in horror as the device in his hand began to ring.
Do not hang up.
1 second later, her own phone, sitting on the nightstand, started vibrating. Unknown number. Grace's hand shook as she answered, pressing the phone to her ear without taking her eyes off the man on the street below. Grace. Edward Stone's voice, smooth, calm, inevitable. How did you... I didn't... Her words tangled, her throat closing around them. You did what most wouldn't, he continued, as if she hadn't tried to speak. Integrity in a world that punishes it. I need someone like that. Someone who doesn't bend when tempted. Someone who chooses right even when it costs them. I'm not... Grace forced the words out. I'm not interested, I just did the right thing, that's all. I don't want anything from you. I don't want to be involved in... Everyone says that. His chuckle was soft, almost fond, the way a teacher might laugh at a student's naive answer. Everyone claims they want no part of this world, until I show them what right really costs. What does that mean? It means, Grace Smith, that you've already made your choice. You just don't know it yet. The line went dead. Grace yanked the phone away from her ear, staring at the blank screen. Below, the driver was already sliding back into the car, the phone tucked away as smoothly as it had appeared. The engine purred to life and the vehicle glided away from the curb with the same predatory silence as the SUV that had come to the diner. But something made Grace look across the street. A man stood there, completely still, hands in his pockets, stance casual, but his attention was laser-focused on her window. He wasn't hiding, wasn't pretending. He was simply there, watching, making sure she saw him watching. Their eyes met across the distance and Grace felt her stomach drop into freefall. He nodded once, a small, deliberate acknowledgement. We see you. We're always watching. You can't hide from us now. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where to find her later. Grace stumbled back from the window, her heart sledgehammering against her ribs. She slid down the wall, knees pulled to her chest, phone still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. The apartment suddenly felt like a cage. Walls too thin, locks too flimsy, windows too exposed. She'd thought returning the wallet was the end of the story. One good deed. One honest act. Then back to her invisible life of tips and textbooks and survival. But Edward Stone didn't forget, and he didn't let go. He'd marked her the moment she made that call, like a hunter marking prey. Except Grace wasn't prey. She was something worse. Something he wanted to keep, to use, to mold into whatever purpose he'd decided she could serve. You've already made your choice. You just don't know it yet. The words echoed in her skull, taking root, spreading like poison through her thoughts. Because somewhere, in the part of her brain that dealt in brutal honesty, Grace understood what he meant. She'd stepped into his world the moment she picked up that wallet, the moment she chose integrity over survival, the moment she proved she was different from everyone else who would have just taken the money and disappeared. She'd shown him she could be trusted, could be controlled, could be counted on to do the right thing even when it destroyed her. And now Edward Stone knew her name, knew where she lived, had people watching her building, following her movements, orchestrating moments like this morning's phone call to remind her that distance was an illusion and privacy was a privilege she no longer possessed. The $10,000 in her cupboard wasn't a gift. It was a down payment, a contract signed without her consent, binding her to a debt she hadn't agreed to but could never repay. Grace pressed her forehead against her knees, trying to steady her breathing, trying to think. But there was nothing to think about. No clever plan. No escape route. No way to refuse what had already been decided. She was already part of something she couldn't escape. And the truly terrifying part? Edward Stone had known that from the very beginning. The note appeared on Tuesday, tucked under her locker at Harper's Diner where only staff had access. Grace found it during her shift break, the envelope cream-colored and expensive, her name written across the front in fluid black ink, calligraphy, not handwriting, each letter a small work of art. She knew before opening it, knew with the same bone-deep certainty that had been growing since that phone call. Inside, a single card, heavy stock, 3 lines. Dinner, tonight, 9 p.m. Rossi's on Lexington. Wear something red, no signature, none needed. Grace should have torn it up, should have walked out of the diner, kept walking, left the city entirely. Instead, she stood there holding the card, feeling its weight, reading those 3 lines over and over until they were burned into her memory. Wear something red. A command dressed as a suggestion. A test to see if she'd obey. Another move in a game where she didn't know the rules but was somehow already losing. The rational part of her brain screamed refusal, but something else, something stronger than fear, deeper than survival instinct, pushed back. Curiosity, yes, but also a desperate need for answers, for understanding, for the chance to look Edward Stone in the eye and demand to know what he wanted from her, why he'd chosen her, how she could make this stop. At 8:47 p.m., Grace stood outside Rossi's wearing the only red thing she owned, a simple dress she'd bought secondhand 3 years ago for a friend's wedding. It was modest, slightly worn at the seams, entirely inadequate for a restaurant where valets wore better suits than most people owned. The building itself was intimidating. Glass and brushed steel, warm amber light spilling onto the sidewalk. The kind of place where reservations were made months in advance and entrees cost more than her weekly rent. Grace didn't belong here. Everyone who looked at her would know it. But she pushed through the doors anyway. The maitre d' saw her immediately, his expression shifting from professional dismissal to something sharper, more attentive. "Miss Smith," he said before she could speak, "Mr. Stone is expecting you. This way." He led her through the main dining room, all white tablecloths and crystal stemware and hushed conversations among people who'd never worried about rent, to a private section in the back, a secluded corner booth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. And there, waiting like he'd been carved from the shadows themselves, sat Edward Stone. He rose as she approached, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt like mockery coming from a man who controlled the city's underworld. He wore all black, tailored perfectly, expensive without being flashy, and somehow made the elegant restaurant feel like his territory, his hunting ground. "Grace." Her name in his mouth sounded like possession. "You came." "Did I have a choice?" A slight smile touched his lips. "Everyone has choices. Sit." She did, because refusing felt pointless. The maitre d' vanished and suddenly they were alone, or as alone as 2 people could be in a public restaurant that somehow felt completely private. Edward didn't speak immediately. He simply watched her, those dark eyes cataloging every detail, the second-hand dress, the nervous way she touched her hair, the defiance she was trying desperately to maintain. Being observed by him felt like being dissected. "You're wondering why you're here," he said finally. "I'm wondering why you won't leave me alone." "Because you passed a test most people fail." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, hands clasped. "The wallet wasn't lost, Grace, it was placed, deliberately. A morality test I conduct occasionally when I need someone I can trust." The words hit her like cold water. It was fake? The whole thing? Nothing about it was fake. The money was real. The choice was real. Your integrity was real. His voice remained perfectly level, conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than her manipulation. Most people steal when given the chance. They tell themselves they deserve it, that it's victimless, that God or karma or the universe wanted them to have it. But you didn't. You called, you returned it. That makes you valuable. Valuable for what? For work I need done. Work that requires someone who doesn't bend when tempted. Someone loyal. Someone who can be trusted with things others would sell at the first opportunity. He paused, letting the words settle. I want you to work for me, Grace. As a personal assistant, you'll handle sensitive matters, run errands that require discretion, be present when I need someone I can rely on absolutely. Grace felt the air leave her lungs. You're insane if you think. In exchange, he continued as if she hadn't spoken, every debt you carry disappears. Your rent, paid in full, 6 months advance. Your mother's medical bills, gone. The collection agencies calling you 3 times a day, silenced. You'll have a salary that lets you live rather than survive. Security, protection, a future that isn't measured in tips and textbooks. The offer hung between them like poison wrapped in silk. Everything she'd struggled for. Everything that kept her awake at night calculating impossible mathematics. He was offering to erase it all. And what do you get? Her voice came out harder than she intended. Your loyalty, your silence, your absolute obedience. No questions, no hesitation. When I call, you answer. When I ask, you comply. You become mine to command, and in return, you never worry about money again. I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale, Grace. The only variable is price. He tilted his head, studying her. Your price just happens to be higher than most. It's not greed that would bend you. It's love, desperation, the weight of responsibility you carry for people who depend on you. She stood up abruptly, chair scraping against polished wood. No, I don't know what kind of person you think I am, but I'm not. I won't work for someone who... Sit down. The command was soft, gentle even, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, the unspoken promise of consequences if she didn't comply. Grace sat. Edward's smile widened, not quite reaching his eyes. You already said yes, Grace. You just don't know it yet. I'm saying no, right now. I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. You said yes, he repeated, the moment you picked up that phone and called me. The moment you proved you could be trusted. The moment you showed me exactly what kind of woman you are. He leaned back, perfectly relaxed, a predator confident in his kill. You can walk out of here tonight. Go back to your life, your poverty, your endless struggle. But we both know how that story ends. In 6 months, maybe less, you'll break. The bills will pile too high. Your mother will need medication you can't afford. You'll be evicted, desperate, drowning. He paused, let the words sink in like knives. Or you can stop fighting what's already inevitable. Accept my offer. Accept that you're mine now, have been since that phone call. Stop pretending you have any other choice. Grace felt tears burning behind her eyes. Frustration, rage, helplessness all mixing into something that tasted like surrender. Because he was right. God help her, he was right about all of it. Why me? She whispered. Because you're incorruptible. Edward's voice softened, almost gentle. And incorruptible people, Grace, are the only ones worth corrupting. He stood, placed a black business card on the table between them. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires. Choose wisely. He left her there, alone in the elegant booth, staring at the card that felt like a contract with the devil. And Grace understood, with terrible clarity, that her resistance was already crumbling. She'd already lost. She just hadn't admitted it yet. Grace moved 3 days later. Not far, she couldn't afford far, just to a studio apartment 2 neighborhoods over. A place advertised on Craigslist by a landlord who didn't ask questions when she paid first and last month's rent in cash. She changed her number, bought a new SIM card from a bodega, told no one at the diner where she'd gone, disappeared into the city's anonymous sprawl like a ghost dissolving into fog. For 2 days she felt almost safe. Then the envelope arrived. It was slipped under her door sometime during her shift, materializing like a threat made solid. Grace found it when she came home after midnight, her new key still unfamiliar in her hand. The envelope was manila, unmarked, innocuous except for the way it seemed to pulse with malice in the hallway's dim light. Inside, photocopies of her unpaid bills, every single one. Rent notices from her old apartment, her mother's hospital invoices with past due stamps bleeding red across the totals.
I need you to listen to me
credit card
very
statements
carefully.
she'd been dodging.
Do not hang up.
A parking ticket she'd forgotten about. Student loan default warnings. Her entire financial life, cataloged and copied with bureaucratic precision. And beneath the bills, a photograph. Her brother Marcus. 17 years old, basketball scholarship, her mother's pride, her own reason for working double shifts. The photo was recent, taken yesterday, maybe the day before, outside his high school. He was laughing at something, backpack slung over one shoulder, completely unaware someone was watching him, documenting him, marking him. Grace's hands shook so violently the papers scattered across her floor. No note, no explanation, none needed. We know where you went. We know who matters to you. We can reach anyone, anytime. The message was clear as a knife against her throat. Her new phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. But Grace already knew who it was. Had known the moment she saw Marcus's photograph. She answered without speaking. Running was predictable. Edward's voice, calm and almost paternal. Understandable even, but ineffective. You can't hide from me, Grace. Not in this city. Not anywhere that matters. Leave my brother alone. Her voice came out raw, desperate. Your brother is perfectly safe, as are you. As is everyone you love. A pause, weighted with implication. You're under my protection now, all of you. Don't mistake that for freedom. Protection from who? From everyone, including yourself. She could hear the smile in his voice. You made your choice when you ran. Now I'm making mine. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., a car will arrive at your new address. Yes, Grace, I know where you are. And you will get in. No arguments, no theatrics. We'll finalize our arrangement like civilized people. And if I refuse, then my protection ends. And we both know how many people in this city would love to know where a young woman with no family support, no security, and substantial debts is living alone. The threat was delivered with casual cruelty. I'm not your enemy, Grace, but I'm the only thing standing between you and a world that will devour you whole. The line went dead. Grace slid down the wall, phone clutched in her trembling hands, Marcus's photograph staring up at her from the floor. She'd tried to run, had actually believed she could escape. But Edward Stone didn't lose what he'd claimed, and he'd claimed her the moment she'd proved she was worth claiming. She couldn't fight this, couldn't run, couldn't protect the people she loved except by surrendering herself. At 8 a.m., Grace was waiting on the curb when the black Mercedes arrived. The mansion sat on the city's eastern edge, where urban sprawl dissolved into manufactured privacy, gated estates hidden behind walls and old-growth trees. Edward's property was a fortress disguised as architecture, glass, steel, and pale stone arranged in clean, modernist lines that somehow felt both elegant and threatening. Security cameras tracked her arrival. Guards in subtle suits watched from positions that looked casual but weren't. The driver led her through doors that whispered open, into a foyer with marble floors and cathedral ceilings that swallowed sound. Everything was white, cream, chrome, sterile and expensive, like a museum dedicated to wealth's cold perfection. A woman appeared from a side corridor. Mid-40s, sharply dressed, her expression professionally neutral. Miss Smith, I'm Elena. I manage Mr. Stone's household staff. He's expecting you in his office. Grace followed her through hallways that felt endless, past rooms she glimpsed but didn't enter. A library, A dining room with a table that could seat 20, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured grounds. She saw other staff members, a young man polishing silver with methodical precision, a woman arranging flowers whose hands shook slightly as Elena passed. Everyone moved with careful efficiency, eyes down, voices low, the kind of fear that had learned to wear professionalism like camouflage. Elena stopped outside a heavy door, knocked twice, waited for a response Grace couldn't hear, then opened it. "Mr. Stone will see you now." The office was all dark wood and leather, bookshelves lined with volumes that looked read rather than decorative. Edward sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Grace's annual salary, dressed casually in a black button-down, looking utterly at ease in his kingdom. "Grace, please sit." He gestured to the chair across from him. On the desk between them, a leather portfolio, a fountain pen, and what looked like a very official document. "We have paperwork to complete." She sat because standing felt like defiance she couldn't afford. Edward opened the portfolio, slid the document toward her. "A non-disclosure agreement. Standard confidentiality clause. You agree never to discuss anything you see, hear, or do while in my employ. Breach of contract carries significant legal consequences." He smiled slightly. "And my consequences are considerably more severe than legal ones." Grace stared at the pages of dense legal text, clause after clause binding her to silence, to secrecy, to complicity in things she couldn't yet imagine. "This is insane," she whispered. "This is business." Edward placed the pen beside the document. "Sign, and your mother's medical bills are paid by noon today. Your brother's tuition is secured for the next 4 years. You receive a salary of $120,000 annually, plus housing, plus benefits. Your old life ends, your new one begins. As what? Your prisoner. As someone valued, protected, provided for." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "I'm giving you what you've been killing yourself trying to achieve, Grace. Security, stability, the chance to stop drowning. All I ask in return is loyalty." She looked at the document, at the pen, at the man who'd hunted her, cornered her, and was now offering her everything while taking away her choice. "If I sign this, I'm yours. You were already mine." Edward's eyes held hers. "This just makes it official." Grace picked up the pen. Her hand hovered over the signature line, every instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to refuse. But Marcus's photograph flashed in her mind. Her mother's hospital bed. The endless grinding weight of poverty that had been crushing her for years. She signed. Edward's smile was small, satisfied. He countersigned below her name, then closed the portfolio with decisive finality. "Welcome to your new life, Grace. Elena will show you to your quarters. You start tomorrow." As Grace stood to leave, legs unsteady beneath her, Edward called after her. "One more thing." She turned. His expression had softened into something that might have been kindness on someone else's face. "You made the right choice. I'll take care of you now. I always take care of what's mine." It should have sounded comforting. Instead, it sounded like the closing of a cage. Grace had been living in Edward's mansion for 6 days when she learned what her salary actually paid for. The first week had been deceptively mundane. Elena had shown her to quarters that were larger than her entire previous apartment, a suite with its own bathroom, a bed that didn't creak, windows overlooking gardens maintained by staff she never saw. Her duties were administrative, organizing files, making calls to legitimate businesses Edward owned, scheduling meetings with lawyers and accountants who never asked questions. She'd almost convinced herself this was survivable, that she could perform these sanitized tasks, collect her salary, and keep her soul mostly intact. Then Victor came through the door bleeding. It was 11:34 p.m. Grace was in Edward's home office, cross-referencing shipping manifests that probably documented something illegal but looked perfectly legal on paper. She heard the commotion first, raised voices, heavy footsteps, someone shouting orders. Then the door burst open and chaos spilled inside. Two men carried a third between them, his arms slung over their shoulders, his shirt soaked dark and wet. Victor Reeves, Edward's lieutenant, the man she'd met once briefly, cold-eyed and professional. Now his face was gray, consciousness flickering, a crimson trail marking their path across the Persian rug. Conference table, now. Edward's voice cut through the panic with surgical precision. He was already moving, phone in one hand, the other gesturing commands to the men. Grace. Here. She stood frozen, every instinct screaming at her to run, to call 911, to do literally anything except what was about to be asked of her. Victor was lowered onto the polished mahogany with the care of something fragile and expensive. Blood pooled beneath him, obscenely bright against the dark wood. Grace could see the wound now. Left side, below the ribs, pumping blood with each shallow breath. Grace. Edward's hand clamped on her shoulder, firm and grounding. I need you to keep him alive. I can't, we need to call. No hospitals, no police, no questions. His eyes locked on hers, dark and absolutely certain. You took anatomy classes, you worked in your mother's hospice care, you know first aid, use it. That's not the same as Grace. He said her name like a fact, not a request. Victor dies if you don't help him. Can you live with that? The question punched through her panic. Victor's breathing was getting shallower, his skin waxy. She could see his pulse hammering in his neck too fast, compensating for blood loss. Maybe 5 minutes before shock set in completely. Maybe less. This is wrong. This is criminal. Call 911. Walk away. But her hands were already moving. Get me towels, clean ones, alcohol, vodka, whiskey, anything above 80 proof, scissors, duct tape, plastic bags. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Move. The room exploded into action. Staff materialized with supplies, spreading them across the table beside Victor's trembling body. Grace's nursing school training kicked in like muscle memory. Assess, stabilize, control the bleeding. She cut away Victor's shirt, revealing the entry wound. Bullet hole, small caliber, bleeding but not arterial. Exit wound in the back, larger, more concerning, through and through. Probably missed major organs but definitely caused internal damage. Hold him still. Grace's hands moved with efficiency she didn't know she possessed. She packed the wounds with clean towels, applying pressure, watching Victor's face contort with pain as consciousness surged back. Fuck, Victor gasped, trying to rise. Stay down, or you die. Grace's voice was ice. She'd found a strange calm in the chaos, a focused clarity that pushed away the moral horror of what she was doing. Right now, there was only the problem. Hole in body, too much blood leaving, not enough staying in. She improvised a compression bandage using towels and duct tape, binding his torso tight enough to maintain pressure without restricting breathing. The bleeding slowed. Not stopped. She couldn't stop it without surgery, but managed. Controlled. Vodka. Someone handed her a bottle. Grace poured it over her hands, over the makeshift bandages, crude sterilization that would have to suffice. Victor screamed, the sound raw and animal. Through it all, Edward watched, not helping, not interfering, just observing her with those dark, calculating eyes, absorbing every movement, every decision, every moment where she chose to save a man's life instead of calling the authorities. 20 minutes later, Victor's breathing had stabilized. His color was still terrible, but his pulse was stronger, the bleeding contained. He needed a real hospital, real doctors, real treatment. But he'd survive long enough to get whatever underground medical care Edward would arrange. Grace stepped back, her hands shaking now that the crisis had passed, covered in Victor's blood up to her elbows. The reality of what she'd just done crashed over her like cold water. She'd saved a criminal's life, had covered up a shooting, had become an active participant in whatever violence had put that bullet in Victor's side. The room had cleared, Victor being carried to wherever Edward kept his pet doctors, staff cleaning blood from floors and furniture with practiced efficiency. Only Edward remained, standing beside the table where a man had nearly died, utterly composed in his black shirt and slacks, not a drop of blood on him. "You didn't run," he said quietly. Grace looked at her blood-stained hands, at the crimson under her fingernails, at the evidence of her complicity. "I couldn't just let him die. Most people would have. Most people freeze when confronted with violence, with consequence, with the reality of the world I operate in." He moved closer, his presence somehow both threatening and comforting. "But you didn't freeze. You acted. Saved a man's life with nothing but kitchen supplies and half-remembered training."
"I need you to listen
I
to me
broke the
very
law.
carefully. Do
Her
not
voice
hang
cracked.
up.
"I should have called 911. Should have. You did what was necessary, what I needed you to do." Edward's hand touched her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, but his eyes held that same, calculating assessment. "This is who you are now, Grace. Not the girl who returned a wallet, not the waitress who dreams of escape. You're someone who makes hard choices in impossible situations. Someone who doesn't break under pressure. I helped cover up a crime. You saved a man's life." He released her, stepped back. "The law isn't morality, Grace. Morality is what you do when it costs you something. Tonight, you proved yours." She wanted to argue, to scream that this was different, that saving a criminal wasn't the same as saving someone innocent. But the words caught in her throat because somewhere in the terrible clarity of hindsight, she knew he was right. She'd made a choice, had crossed a line she could never uncross. "Take tonight to process what happened," Edward continued, his voice returning to that businesslike tone. "Tomorrow we continue. Elena will have your next assignments ready. What if I can't do this again?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You will. Because you already understand what most people never learn. That survival isn't about staying clean. It's about making choices that let you live with yourself afterward." Edward moved toward the door, then paused. "Victor's alive because of you. He'll remember that. So will I." His eyes held hers with absolute certainty. "You're mine now, Grace. Not by contract, not by threat, by choice. You chose to stay, chose to act, chose to become part of this world. I didn't choose." "You did." His voice was soft, final. "The moment you didn't walk away." He left her standing in the office, the smell of blood and vodka hanging heavy in the air, her hands trembling with adrenaline crash and moral vertigo. Grace looked at her reflection in the dark window, hair disheveled, shirt ruined, blood drying on her arms. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. This wasn't the girl who'd worked at Harper's Diner, who'd dreamed of simple stability. This was someone else. Someone who'd saved a criminal's life. Someone who'd chosen silence over law. Someone who belonged to Edward Stone not through force, but through the slow, terrible erosion of every line she'd once sworn she'd never cross. The moral boundary was gone, crossed, obliterated. And the most terrifying part was how easy it had been. The apartment arrived first. Not in the mansion. Edward was too calculating for that level of obvious captivity. Instead, a penthouse in the financial district, all floor-to-ceiling windows and marble countertops, the kind of place Grace had only seen in magazines left behind by wealthy diner customers. Elena handed her the keys with her usual professional neutrality, along with an address and a reminder that Mr. Stone expected her presence at the estate each morning by 8. "It's yours," Elena said. "Fully furnished, rent paid indefinitely." Grace stood in the empty living room that first night, expensive silence pressing in from all sides, and tried to feel grateful, tried to convince herself this was generosity, not strategy. But the apartment felt like a beautiful cage, all that glass offering views of a city she could see but no longer belonged to. The clothes came next. Designer labels Grace couldn't pronounce, delivered in tissue-wrapped boxes by a personal shopper who measured her with cold efficiency. Silk blouses, tailored blazers, Shoes that cost more than she used to make in a month. Everything in blacks, grays, muted tones that matched Edward's aesthetic. "Mr. Stone wants you to look the part," the shopper explained, adjusting a jacket's fit. "You represent him now." Represent. Such a careful word for belong to. But Grace wore the clothes, lived in the apartment, accepted each gift with the growing understanding that they weren't gifts at all. They were investments. Edward Stone was molding her, reshaping her from broke waitress into something polished and useful. Someone who could stand beside him in expensive restaurants and look like she belonged. Someone whose appearance wouldn't raise questions when she accompanied him to meetings that definitely broke several laws. The transformation was slow, deliberate. Each kindness another thread in a web she was only beginning to recognize. 3 weeks after Victor's shooting, Edward summoned her to his private study, not the office where she'd saved a man's life, but a smaller, more intimate space lined with first editions and furnished with leather chairs that smelled of money and tobacco. He was reading when she entered, a tumbler of whiskey catching lamplight, looking relaxed in a way that somehow made him more dangerous. "Sit, Grace." He gestured to the chair across from him. "We should talk." She sat, the expensive fabric of her new slacks whispering against leather. Everything about her now was curated by him, controlled. "You've adapted well," Edward said, setting his book aside. "Better than I expected. Victor speaks highly of you. Says you visit him during recovery, check his bandages, make sure he's healing properly. He could still get an infection. Makeshift field medicine isn't—" "You care." Edward's interruption was soft. "That's what makes you different. You saved his life because you couldn't bear not to, and now you care whether he stays saved." He took a slow sip of whiskey. "Most people in my world see others as assets or obstacles. You still see them as human. Is that a problem? It's exploitable." His honesty was almost refreshing, but also valuable. Loyalty born from genuine concern lasts longer than loyalty bought with fear. Grace felt something twist in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite resignation. "Is that what you're doing? Exploiting my empathy?" "I'm utilizing your strengths." He stood, moved to the window overlooking grounds she knew were patrolled by armed guards. "You keep calling me Mr. Stone. Stop. My name is Edward. Use it." The command felt like intimacy forced at gunpoint. "Why does it matter what I call you?" "Because I'm not your employer, Grace. I'm not some distant authority figure you serve and resent." He turned, his gaze finding hers with uncomfortable intensity. "I'm the person who stands between you and everything that would destroy you. That requires trust. Partnership, not the formality of titles. Partnership implies equality. It implies mutual benefit." He returned to his chair, settled back with that same predatory grace. "You benefit from my protection, my resources, my influence. I benefit from your integrity, your capability, your incorruptibility." He smiled slightly at the last word. "It's symbiotic. Symbiotic is when both parties have a choice. You had a choice." His voice hardened just enough to remind her. "You made it when you signed that contract, when you saved Victor instead of running, when you accepted this apartment, these clothes, this life I've given you." He leaned forward. "Every day you don't leave is you choosing me again." The words settled like weights on her chest because they were true. She hadn't tried to run again, hadn't contacted police, hadn't done anything except slide deeper into the comfortable captivity he'd constructed around her. "Why?" Grace's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Why me? You could have anyone. People with actual medical training, with criminal records who wouldn't hesitate. Why choose someone who still has a conscience?" Edward finished. "Because conscience can be redirected, Grace. Shaped. Someone with no moral compass can't be trusted. They'll betray you the moment a better offer appears. But someone like you—" He paused, choosing his words. Someone who believes in doing right can be convinced that right is more complicated than they thought. That morality exists in shades of gray rather than black and white. You're manipulating me. I'm teaching you. He said it without apology. The world isn't the fairy tale you were raised to believe in. Good people suffer. Evil people prosper. The law protects the powerful and crushes the weak. His eyes held hers. You can't change that. No one can. But you can survive it. With me. Grace felt tears burning behind her eyes. Frustration, recognition, the terrible understanding that he was right. She'd watched it her whole life. Her mother worked herself sick and stayed poor. Landlords stole deposits from people with no legal recourse. Corporations crushed small businesses while politicians called it progress. I don't want to become like them, she whispered. Like you. You won't. Edward's voice gentled, and that made it worse. The kindness that felt genuine even when she knew it was strategy. You'll become something better. Someone who understands power but hasn't lost her humanity. Someone who can navigate my world without being consumed by it. He rose, came to her chair, and did something unexpected. Knelt beside it so they were eye level. The gesture felt absurdly intimate. This crime lord lowering himself to her position, his hand coming to rest on the armrest near hers. I'm not your enemy, Grace. I know it feels that way. But everything I've done, the job, the apartment, the clothes, pushing you past your limits, all of it is to show you what you're capable of, who you can become. Your perfect accomplice. My partner. His hand moved, covered hers. The touch was warm, almost comforting. Someone I trust. Someone who trusts me. Grace looked at their hands. His scarred and confident, hers still stained with shadows of Victor's blood that wouldn't quite wash away. She should pull back, should maintain distance, should remember he was a monster dressed in expensive clothes and complicated philosophy. But his touch felt like the first human connection she'd had since entering this world, and she hated herself for wanting it. I don't trust you, she said, but the words lacked conviction. You will. Edward's thumb traced the back of her hand, gentle and possessive. Because deep down, you already understand. I'm the only one who sees you, Grace. The only one who values what you can do. Your family needs you to sacrifice. Your old life needed you to disappear. But I need you to become. He stood, released her hand, the loss of contact somehow worse than its presence. Take the weekend. Rest. Monday, we have a meeting with associates from Chicago. You'll accompany me. What if I say no? Edward's smile was patient. You won't. He left her in the study, surrounded by expensive books and moral complexity, her hand still warm from his touch, and her mind spinning with the recognition that she was losing herself. The girl who'd returned a wallet felt like a stranger. Someone naive and foolish who'd believed integrity was simple and right and wrong were clearly defined. This new Grace, the one who lived in penthouses and saved criminals, and responded to Edward's touch with confused gratitude, was someone she didn't recognize. But maybe, in the terrible mathematics of survival, that was the point. The betrayal came in the form of federal surveillance photos delivered to Edward's desk by a contact inside the FBI. Grace saw them during a morning briefing she'd started attending without being asked. Another sign of how seamlessly she'd integrated into Edward's operation. The images showed his warehouse on the industrial pier, his distribution network, his associates meeting in locations that were supposed to be secure. Someone had been talking. Someone close. Edward's reaction was glacial calm. He studied each photograph with the detached interest of someone examining evidence of his own mortality, then looked up at the 5 people in the room. Victor, now fully recovered, Marcus Chen, his financial advisor, James, head of security, Elena, and Grace. We have a rat, Edward said simply. Someone in the inner circle is feeding information to the FBI. That person will be identified and dealt with. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Grace felt her pulse quicken, not from fear of being suspected, but from the sudden, terrible understanding of what dealt with meant in Edward's world. After the others left, Edward asked her to stay. "I need your help with something delicate," he said, moving to the window where morning light carved shadows across his face. "Someone I trust is betraying me. I need to know who. How would I?" "By watching them." He turned to face her. "You're invisible to my people, Grace. They see you as staff, as peripheral. They talk around you, relax around you, let their guard down, because you're the moral one, the innocent one." His eyes held hers. "I need you to observe. Listen. Report back on anything unusual. Any
I need you to
inconsistency
listen
in
to me
behavior,
very carefully.
any nervousness,
Do not hang
any
up.
sign someone isn't who they claim to be." Grace felt nausea rise in her throat. "You want me to spy on them? I want you to help me protect what we've built. What you've built. This isn't my empire. Isn't it?" Edward's voice was soft, dangerous. "You live off its proceeds. You benefit from its protection. Victor's alive because of it, and because of you. You're not separate from this, Grace. You're woven into it. I'm not an investigator. I don't know how to. You know people. You read them. It's why you're good at what you do." He moved closer, and she hated how her body responded to his proximity, heightened awareness that felt like fear and something worse. "I'm not asking you to confront anyone. Just watch, listen, tell me what you see." "And then what? What happens to whoever I identify?" Edward's silence was answer enough. "I can't." Grace's voice broke. "I can't be responsible for someone's death. You're responsible for Victor's life. Why is death different?" His hand came up, cupped her jaw with unexpected gentleness. "This is survival, Grace. Theirs or ours. The person betraying me would see you imprisoned, would see everyone in this organization destroyed without a second thought. I'm asking you to choose which side you're on." The terrible thing was she'd already chosen. Had chosen weeks ago when she saved Victor, when she accepted the apartment, when she started calling him Edward instead of Mr. Stone. "I'll watch," she whispered. "But I won't. I can't be the one who. You'll tell me what you see, that's all." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The rest is my burden to carry." For 3 days, Grace became a ghost haunting Edward's inner circle. She watched Marcus Chen take personal calls in hushed tones, saw his hands shake when Edward entered rooms unexpectedly, noticed how Victor's eyes tracked movements with soldiers' paranoia, trusting no one. Observed James reviewing security footage with obsessive attention, jumping at sounds that weren't there. Everyone looked guilty when you watched them closely enough. But it was Elena who broke. Grace found her in the kitchen at 2 a.m., when the mansion was supposed to be empty, making a phone call with her back to the door. The conversation was brief, coded, but Grace caught enough. Mention of the photographs, a question about next delivery, and Elena's response, "He suspects. I need to accelerate the timeline." Grace backed away silently, her heart hammering, and went directly to Edward's study. He listened to her report without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he simply nodded. "You're certain it was Elena?" "I heard her. She mentioned the photographs, talked about accelerating something." "Thank you, Grace." He stood, buttoned his jacket. "Go to your apartment, don't come back until I call." "What are you going to?" "Go." Not angry, not threatening, just absolute. "Now." Grace fled. She didn't sleep that night. Stayed awake in her penthouse watching the city lights and trying not to imagine what was happening to Elena. Trying not to see the parallels. Another woman caught in Edward's orbit. Another person who'd made choices that led to one final, terrible consequence. "I killed her," Grace thought numbly. "I identified her, and now she's dead." The phone rang at 6 a.m. Edward's voice, calm as always. "It's done." Elena confessed. "She's been removed from the organization." Removed? The euphemism felt obscene. "You mean?" I mean, she's no longer a threat. A pause. Come to the estate. We need to talk. She found him in the same study where he'd given her the assignment, looking exactly as composed as he had 3 days ago, as if ordering someone's execution was just another item on his to-do list. Sit. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour, handed her one. You did well. I got someone killed. You identified a traitor. Elena made her choices long before you discovered them. He sat across from her, studying her face. You look devastated. Why? You didn't pull the trigger. Didn't make the call. You simply reported what you saw. That's the same thing. Is it? Edward leaned back. When you were a waitress, if you saw someone choking, would you save them? Of course. If that person was a murderer, a rapist, would you still save them? I don't know. Maybe. Yes. Exactly. Because your morality is pure, simple. You save who you can because that's what good people do. His eyes held hers. But Elena wasn't choking. She was poisoning, and you stopped her. That makes you the hero in this scenario, not the villain. That's not... You're twisting it. I'm showing you what you refuse to see. He set down his glass, leaned forward with sudden intensity. You told me you hated this world, hated what I do, what I represent. But you fit perfectly in it, Grace. You identify threats. You protect your own. You make hard choices when necessary. That's not corruption. That's evolution. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Grace had watched Elena for 3 days with cold calculation, had reported her findings without hesitation, had known exactly what would happen and done it anyway. I've become what I feared, she whispered. You've become what you needed to be. Edward's voice gentled. The girl who returned my wallet wouldn't have survived what you've survived. She would have broken, run, or gotten herself killed. But you didn't. You adapted. You're stronger than you think, Grace, stronger than I expected. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had saved Victor's life, that had accepted Edward's gifts, that had damned Elena with a single report. They didn't look different, but they'd done terrible things, irreversible things. How do you live with it? Her voice cracked. The guilt? By accepting that guilt is the price of survival, by understanding that in this world there are no clean hands, only people honest enough to acknowledge the blood on theirs and people who pretend they're different. He reached across the space between them, took her hand. You're not innocent anymore, Grace, but you're alive. You're protected. And you're mine. The possessive statement should have angered her, should have triggered some final resistance, some last gasp of the person she used to be. Instead, it felt like relief. Because if she belonged to Edward, if this was his world and his choices and his burden, then maybe she could stop carrying the weight of her own complicity. Could let him be the monster, so she didn't have to see herself as one. I can't go back, Grace said. Not a question, a realization. No. Edward's grip on her hand tightened. You can't. The woman who walked into Harper's diner is gone. The woman sitting here now is someone else entirely. Someone who understands what power costs, what survival requires. He was right. The transformation was complete. Grace Smith, the waitress who'd believed in simple morality and clear choices, had died the moment she'd reported Elena. In her place sat someone harder, colder, capable of terrible things when necessary. Someone who fit perfectly in Edward Stone's world. The most terrifying part wasn't what she'd become. It was how little she wanted to change back. 6 months after Elena's removal, Grace woke in her penthouse to the particular quality of light that meant autumn had arrived, golden and melancholic, casting long shadows across marble floors that no longer felt foreign. This was her space now. Her life. The thread count of her sheets was higher than her old apartment's rent. The coffee machine on her counter cost more than she used to make in a month. She no longer found these facts jarring. Grace had stopped marking time by before and after, stopped comparing the woman she'd been to the woman she'd become. That kind of introspection led to paralysis, and paralysis was a luxury she could no longer afford. She'd learned to live in the present tense, attending meetings where men discussed distribution routes and profit margins in the same tone as legitimate businessmen, accompanying Edward to dinners where she smiled at politicians and prosecutors who were definitely on his payroll, managing crises that ranged from accounting discrepancies to bodies that needed disposal. She'd become efficient at all of it. Victor called her the Ice Queen now, affectionately, but with underlying respect. The staff deferred to her almost as much as they did to Edward. She had her own office in the mansion, her own encrypted phone, her own decisions to make about who could be trusted and who needed to be cut loose. She'd become exactly what Edward had seen in her that first night. Someone incorruptible who could be corrupted. Someone moral who understood that morality was a luxury of the powerless. The phone rang at 7:23 a.m. Not her regular cell, but the encrypted one, matte black, given to her after Elena, used only for communications that couldn't leave digital traces. The ringtone was distinctive, a single, sharp chime that cut through silence like a blade. The same sound that had begun everything. Grace picked it up, already knowing who it would be. Yes? Grace? Edward's voice, familiar as her own heartbeat now. Good morning. Are you awake? I am now. Good. I need you to come to the estate. There's something we need to discuss. 9 a.m. What kind of something? A pause. Then, the kind that requires a decision. The line went dead. Grace stood at her window, phone still in hand, watching the city wake beneath her. Traffic beginning to flow, people rushing to jobs where the worst moral compromise they'd face was lying to their boss about why they were late. She'd been one of them once, had rushed through those same streets, terrified of being late, of losing shifts she desperately needed. Now she was the one people feared being late for. Edward was waiting in the garden, a choice that felt deliberate, taking her out of offices and studies where business was conducted, placing them in morning sunlight among carefully maintained roses. He wore charcoal slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking almost casual except for the intensity in his eyes that never softened. Walk with me, he said. They moved through paths Grace had walked dozens of times, past fountains and hedges, the estate's beauty a carefully constructed facade over the violence it housed. She'd learned to appreciate the metaphor. 6 months ago, Edward began, you were terrified of me. Terrified of this world. You came here because you had no choice. I remember. Now you're here because you choose to be. Every morning you wake up and decide to stay, to participate, to be part of what we do. He stopped, turned to face her. I want to make that choice explicit, official. Grace's pulse quickened. What do you mean? I mean it's time to stop pretending you're staff. Stop pretending you're temporary. Stop acting like you're here under duress when we both know you've had a dozen opportunities to leave and haven't taken any of them. His eyes held hers with that familiar intensity. I'm offering you a real position. Partner, not employee, not captive. Actual partnership in everything I've built. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Or, Edward continued, you can walk away. I'll wire you enough money to disappear. Start over somewhere far from here. No strings, no threats, no consequences. You'd be rich, safe, and free. Grace felt something twist in her chest. Not quite hope, not quite dread. You just let me go? Yes. His honesty was almost brutal. Because forcing you to stay would make you a liability. But choosing to stay, wanting to stay, that makes you invaluable. And if I choose to leave? Then you leave, and I find someone else to fill the role you've been auditioning for. He stepped closer. But we both know you won't. Do we? Grace. He said her name like a fact. Look at yourself, Really, look. You're not the girl who returned my wallet. You're not the waitress who dreamed of better tips and paid rent. You're someone who makes decisions that alter lives, who commands respect through competence and fear, who belongs in rooms where power is negotiated. His voice dropped. You're someone who finally fits in her own skin. Why would you give that up? The question pierced something deep, because he was right. Grace had spent her entire life feeling too small, too powerless, too invisible. And now when she walked into rooms, conversations stopped. When she spoke, people listened. When she made recommendations, they were followed. She'd become someone who mattered. The cost had been everything she'd believed about herself, but the reward had been finally becoming someone she didn't have to apologize for being. If I stay, she said slowly, I'm admitting I'm complicit in all of it. Everything you do, everything we've done. You're already complicit. This just makes it official. Grace walked to the fountain, looked at her reflection in the water. The woman staring back was polished, expensive, confident. Designer clothes, professional makeup. The kind of woman who belonged in penthouses and power structures. No trace of the exhausted waitress remained. I called you once, she said quietly, to return a wallet. I thought it was the right thing to do. It was. Edward moved beside her. It just turned out the right thing had consequences you didn't anticipate. I never hung up, did I? That call just kept going. Pulled me further in until I couldn't remember what silence sounded like. Grace. He turned her to face him, hands on her shoulders. You can hang up now. I'm giving you the choice. Walk away rich or stay and rule beside me. No judgment either way. She looked into his eyes. Dark, calculating, but also honest in their own terrible way. He'd never lied to her. Had told her exactly what he was, what this world cost, what she'd become. Every step had been transparent, even when it was monstrous, and she'd taken every step willingly. I'll stay, Grace heard herself say. The words felt inevitable. True. Edward's smile was small, knowing. Good. Then you finally understand. Understand what? That you were never trapped. You were always exactly where you wanted to be. You just needed permission to admit it. The truth of it settled like stone in her chest. She hadn't been forced. Hadn't been coerced beyond that first push. Every choice after had been hers, staying, adapting, becoming. Edward had simply provided the excuse. Come, he said, taking her hand. There's a meeting in 10 minutes. Associates from Miami. They need to understand the new power structure. They walked back toward the mansion together, and Grace felt the shift, subtle but unmistakable. She wasn't following him. They were walking side by side, equal predators in a world that rewarded teeth. The conference room was full when they entered, 8 men in expensive suits, the kind who ran criminal enterprises with corporate efficiency. They were already standing, but Grace noticed the moment they registered her presence beside Edward. The recalculation in their eyes, the understanding that she wasn't decoration or assistant. She was power that needed acknowledging. Gentlemen, Edward said smoothly, some of you know Grace. The rest will. She speaks with my authority on all matters. Any agreements made with her are agreements made with me. No one questioned it. No one looked skeptical. They simply nodded, accepting this new reality because Edward had declared it so. And Grace, the girl who'd once survived on tips and prayer, took her seat at the table where empires were divided and lives were valued in dollars. She'd done the right thing once in a diner that felt like another lifetime, and that single act of integrity had led her here, to power built on compromise, to wealth earned through complicity, to a throne constructed from every moral boundary she'd crossed. The girl who'd returned the wallet was gone. In her place sat a woman who'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous choice is the honest one, because honesty had made her visible, And visibility in Edward Stone's world was just another word for belonging.